Okay, we get to mix things up a little bit now for the summit and kick off our first panel session. This one will be on women in the financial modelling, and I have the pleasure of introducing the host, the person who's going to lead this discussion and introduce the rest of the guests today, and that is Danielle Stein Fairhurst. So welcome, Danielle. Thank you for giving up some of your time to be a part of the summit. As a brief intro for you and for everybody else watching, Danielle is a Sydney-based financial modeler, Microsoft MVP. She's written numerous books on financial modeling, runs lots of different virtual meetup groups, including the Women in Financial Modeling online community. So I don't think we could have found a better person to lead this panel session. So thank you, Danielle. I will hand over to you straight away, and I'll see you back at the end for a bit of Q&A.
Thanks, Charles. Okay, well, welcome, and yeah, thanks for having it. It's my pleasure to introduce you now to the rest of the panel. So we've got Stephanie Annerose. Let's start with her. She is the Director of Energy and Power Investment Banking at Piper Sandler and is currently one of the top ranking female financial modelers in the Financial Modelling World Cup. So welcome, Stephanie. Hi.
Hi, nice to meet you, everyone.
Yeah. And we've also got Hilary Smart, who is an Associate Director at Operis. She has a Master's of Mathematics from Cambridge. And in 2013, she took home the ModelOff Financial Modelling World Championship. So, hi, Hilary. Fantastic to have you here.
Thanks, Danielle.
And lastly, we have Rickard Warnelid, who's also in Sydney, as am I. He has been in the financial modelling sector for long enough to be nominated for a Lifetime Achievement Award, which is going to be announced on Friday. And this is weird. I'm up for the award as well. So yeah. May the best man win. Don't know. We'll see. Find out on Friday. So that was based on Rickard's fantastic work with Navigator, Chorality, and with Mazars. And he has recruited and managed hundreds of financial modelling professionals throughout his career. So he has lots of things to say about the women or lack of women in financial modelling. Hi, Rickard.
Hi, Danielle. Thanks for having us.
Okay, I thought I'd just start off with a couple of my thoughts about the topic, and then I'll get you guys to sort of chime in and say what you think about it. So, you know, I've been around for quite a while in the financial modelling industry, as many of you have, and I guess the fact that there weren't many women in the industry is probably something that I'd never really thought about. And when ModelOff started quite some time ago, I guess it didn't really appeal to me as a competition. And when they started to announce the winners, and there was just kind of this, you know, big showcase of white men, you know, year after year, every single time. And it started a bit of controversy around it, and which really made me start to think about it. You know, why is it just men at the top of the field, or presumably what we perceive to be at the top? And I guess what I was realizing, I suppose, is that it's like breeding like, and the way that they were marketing it back then, it was kind of like, I don't know if you remember, Hilary, but it was like this kind of, you know, XL smackdown, you know, this kind of very macho type of thing. And I was so excited in 2013 when Hilary won. It was just a really exciting moment for many female financial modelers, and we thought fantastic, things going to change. But I guess, you know, things kind of went back to the way they were, and then ModelOff became Full Stack Modeler, and sort of Financial Modelling World Cup, or FMWC, has come taken over the reins of, you know, championships. But we see the same things over and over again. Now, the FMWC have done a fantastic job of showcasing women in the battles, and Stephanie is amazing. Like, she's just done some incredible work, and Hilary has led a lot of the battles. And I think, Stephanie, you've got a battle coming up later on today.
Yes, that's true.
That's exciting. So, you know, just with this, we keep talking about it, and I do get tired of talking about it, but we need to talk about it. It's something that's I see as being a real problem. And I started that the Women in Financial Modelling online meetup group back in 2020, and we get together to, talk about not just Financial Modelling World Cup, but about, just things to do with financial modelling. And we get every time there's a competition, we get together and we do a debrief, which is great. But I do feel like not a lot is changing, and not a lot is changing quickly. It's not just the competitions that is a problem, but the industry in general, I think, is lacking female participation, and that's really what we need to address today. And I suppose the first thing that I wanted to ask you guys what you think about is, do we actually have a problem, and why is that a problem, and what, the industry is missing out on potentially 50% of the workforce, and why is that a problem, and is it a problem? And I thought maybe we could start with you, Rickard. I know you've got some really strong thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, sure. I'll be happy to. And look, I really share your views that this conversation, if you like, really started around that ModelOff era, because that was the first time, social media sort of came about, and there were visible leaders, and it was pretty clear that the visible leaders in the majority of cases at that time were men, right? Did that represent the actual industry, or was that just what happened in the competition? Who knows? But it became more clear that was basically a starting point for discussion. And I agree with you on the journey on what's going on there. And I mean, have we got a problem? I think it's quite interesting. You can look at I suppose the tip of the iceberg, the competitions and rankings, etc. I mean, that's not really the industry, if you call it that. And if you look at where is the problem, I think the biggest problem is, if you look at, this is not unique for the financial modeling world, but I don't think anyone would disagree if I have to say it's good to have diverse workplaces for engagement, for just, getting to better teamwork and getting better financial results. That's a well-known fact. And gender diversity in financial modeling teams in general is a problem. It's not diverse at all. I would also caveat things a little bit to separate, and I think we'll come to that point a bit later. I do think there are categories. If we simplify it and talk about FP&A modeling and transaction modeling, the gender diversity is far worse on the transaction side of things compared to and sort of the FP&A universe, if you like. So one part that's missing out that is a real problem is, I suppose, workplace relationships, and not relationships per se, I suppose environment and collaboration and that sort of thing. But I also think a lot about clients, the end users of financial modelers. I really don't think we as an industry can deliver the maximum output if we only have one side of the equation in the thinking room. I do think it's important, not knowing Excel. That's not you're not better or worse if you're male or female, but to understand an industry, knowing your background, having certain parameters and values, etc. I don't think men or women are better, but collectively we get to better outcomes. So that's something I think a lot about when I look at our clients and clients in general, and like we're only serving up half the benefits there.
You look like you're busting to chime in there, Hilary.
Well, I agree we haven't got a problem, and I agree diversity of thought is better. When I was thinking about, particularly in this space, why I think that's better. Firstly, I do agree that that men, obviously I don't necessarily agree that every man I've ever met is better at Excel than I am, but there is certainly a stereotype that men are better at numeracy. Don't think it holds in every case, in lots of cases. But I also think there's a stereotype that women are better at lots of skills that are actually very relevant for transactions, like dealing with people and scheduling and kind of managing deadlines and timelines. And I think those are really relevant skills on things like transactions. And I work in kind of model auditing world. And when you work on a deal with someone who's good at managing that flow, everything runs very smoothly. And I think sometimes there are skill sets that we maybe don't value as highly as we should, that actually make a real difference to how things run.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Stephanie?
Yeah, no, I agree with both Rickard and Hilary there. And I would just add, recently we've seen, especially like in the last years, I got like a lot of people asking me, okay, do you know good financial modeler, because we are trying to hire, and it feels like the talent pool is limited. So if there is diversity and we can really broaden the talent pool, I think encouraging diversity will be great for the industry. And just to like on that, like maybe to make like an analogy that like most people can relate. Imagine if you were just doing like your model with like 10 basic function and always the same function, like using some count and like other functions that are very current, and you're not using like the latest function in Excel, then you don't get necessarily the best model. So the idea of like really having an industry that is diverse is like diversity of thought, diversity of skills that we need to encourage there. And so like tapping on a full talent pool is best for the industry there. So yes, we have a problem, and there needs to be things to do to address this problem.
Yeah.
But just one more thought, Danielle, because I think this generally causes confusion. We tend to go from gender diversity to diversity and flow on. But I think, and something I'm really proud of, is the general diversity, like ethnical diversity, for example, in financial modeling, I think is fabulous. You talk about white males in ModelOff, perhaps, but generally speaking, in most of the teams I've interacted with, it's quite mixed compared to other teams I work with.
I don't know. Do you remember that year for ModelOff when it was like, all of our top first, second, and third were British, and no one mentioned the fact that they were white males?
Yeah, right.
Do you remember that?
I don't recall that now.
But I mean, yeah, I suppose it depends where you work, and it's certainly not the only issue, gender diversity.
Yeah, I also think that in terms of ethnic diversity, the industry is not all white, but I think there is a way to go in terms of making sure we got representation from lots of different ethnic groups. So I don't actually think we're there on ethnic diversity. I think being all white is not the end point of that process.
Yeah. So we're going to focus really just on gender today. But what I really wanted to ask, and I might go back to you on this, Hilary, because I know that Opera's is really trying to encourage more women, and they've got some interesting processes in their hiring practices to try to pick out or to target women. Can you talk a little bit about that, Hilary?
Yeah, so Opera's has actually always been, at least in the time I've been there, been pretty good for gender diversity kind of in the leadership roles, which is, I think, unusual. But in the analytical team, that has sometimes been more mixed. And they have had, looking at the team now, a very successful push to make sure that we are recruiting more sort of STEM female graduates at the bottom end to come into those analytical roles that then kind of move up and ensure that we've got the pipeline there for the future. So I had a chat with the ahead of this panel. I had a chat with the recruitment team to talk about some of the initiatives that they're doing. So they're saying that there's particular organisations you can work with who will who target. Like, so I think we did a careers fair. I was involved a couple of weeks ago that was targeting STEM women graduates. And they said there were particular things in the hiring process. So we as a company, we don't really look for people, we don't mind people who've got a financial background, but we look for people with a numerical background because we can teach the finances. And just making sure that that's really clearly emphasized in where the job is advertised, because women are much more likely to be kind of put off by that and think, oh, I haven't got that. Whereas men are like, oh, I'll give it a go anyway. I'm generalizing horrendously here, and it doesn't apply to everyone. But that is something that can be done to make sure it's clear that actually this is not prerequisite, and also making sure that that it's clear what the interview process is and what it's not. So our interview process is number puzzles. And Stephanie, we were having a really interesting conversation the other day about interviews, and maybe you can speak a bit more about that in a minute. But some people, apparently sometimes it's quite off-putting. People say number puzzles and they think they're going to be locked in a room and then given a sheet and said, how many can you get done in 10 minutes or whatever? But actually it's quite a collaborative process, and we're looking for people being able to demonstrate their thought processes and learn things as they go. Sorry, I can hear a bit of feedback. I hope everybody else can't. So making it clear that actually the interview process is collaborative. Most people enjoy interview processes. So just making sure that information is out there, reaching out directly to people who we think are a good fit for our organisation. And I can see we had, I think we had 5 analysts join. In the last month or two, we've had 6 new analysts join, and 4 of them are women. So they're doing something.
That's great. And you have a similar kind of process, is that right, Stephanie?
In terms of process, yes, we have a similar type of process in terms of like broadening, effectively, like being intentional of like having for women and like any type of diversity actually in the hiring process, having like special events there. So yes, similar process. I would say in terms of like one of the things that Hilary just mentioned, and I wanted to like comment on that, which is based on my past experience, like in any interview process where somebody would ask me, okay, how good are you, for example, in Excel, or how good are you at maths? It's a very difficult question for me to answer, because do you mean how good are you in terms of like maths that a 10-year-old can do, or do you think how good are you in terms of like what you're expecting like the top student in a PhD class to be able to do? And so one of the things that I found like really interesting like in processes and that it would go very well for me is like when very early on like those numerical skills were actually tested. Like if you have a test very early and you're like, and it's more like a brain teaser type of test to see if like how logical do you think, then the process would flow like much better. And I would see like more, I would say like positive attitude of like pushing me further into the process, like from the various recruiters there, as opposed to like a process where they ask me how good are you, and I was not necessarily like very kind of like, oh, I'm the best, I can do X, Y, Z. And so then the feedback would be, oh, we didn't know if you could do the job. And it's just like one of those things where when you talk about diversity and you're trying to hire like a much diverse pool of people, then like having those kind of tests that are more like less about like, I would say somehow bragging, but more about like, okay, what can you really do in a situation actually helps the process and give like a different outcomes there.
Yeah. And what about at Mazars, Rickard?
It's quite similar to what Hilary was outlining. A lot of that, I would say, if I was to add anything, I would add we have like most large professional services firms say reasonably good balance at early stage levels, and then it skews quite rapidly towards the end at the more senior levels, right? Mm-hmm. So this is not, it's far from a secret. It is possibly the most discussed and active area for improvement, not just for us, but for any professional services firm in the world. And I mean, the focus is intense. And I think it's helping. But I mean, it's not just activities, also a lot about like, in terms of leadership training and smaller things that I've started picking up in the last couple of years, things like, inclusive language, for example, in a recruitment process or in an ad. And for example, what you mentioned, Stephanie, to outline a process that would actually appeal also to women and not, deter women from applying for the reasons you've outlined, right? And sure, you need to use some sort of stereotyping when you're dealing with these things. You're still going to design something and some women will say, I don't like this process now. Sure, but as long as you think about it, you do your best and we might actually get somewhere. And I think that's the key objective once you start talking about it. Something else that we're trying to do, and I know you've got some experience in this as well, Danielle. I mean, there's a concept talking about overcoached and under-mentored, which typically relates to women in this sort of situation where instead of saying, for example, I've got a big thing about gender neutral or at least not male dominated panels. We're doing well tonight, I've got to say that. But for example, if you try to get female speakers, it can be quite difficult. And it's certainly not due to a lack of competence. it's a lack of maybe confidence or interest to be seen. And there's a chicken and egg situation there. I put quite a lot of focus on saying, here's a spot, I think you'll be great in doing this job. But even so, that can be challenging, and that means there's a lot. You see it all the time. Lots of male panels, and I know, Danielle, we talked about this the other week because you had similar problems, right?
Yeah, I run a lot of events, and I'm always looking for speakers, and it's incredible. It's I have to ask. So I really, really find it difficult to find women speakers. I can find them, but it's very hard to convince them to speak, because they'll say, like, I might find somebody who's got something really relevant for the audience, and they'll say, oh no, I don't, I'm not a financial modeler. So it doesn't matter, it's just for the audience. Or whereas I could ask a blokes, and they'd go, yeah, that's fine. Hang on, what's the topic again? Like, they haven't even, they'll just say yes before they even know what it is. And most women will say no initially, and then I kind of have to coach them. So it's really hard to, I know it's quite difficult. It's just my experience. It is a frustration. I find that they maybe are lacking in role models, or, I don't know. Is that something you've experienced, Hilary? Do you see that?
Well, I'm less involved in I don't have to book speakers, and I don't attend a huge amount of conferences at the moment, but so not so much that, but I was thinking, sorry, I had something relevant to say and I've completely forgotten it. Come to somebody else and come back to me.
Yeah.
I would like to comment on that. Like, I've received invitation to speak on panel, and sometimes it's just the flip side of that, where there is a tendency of yes, we want more diverse panel, we want to showcase more diversity, and so you receive inquiries about can you speak on this panel, and then it's so and so and so, and it's just I just feel yes, it's people much more senior than me. It's not my peers that I'm gonna interact in a panel on this panel with. And so in that case, I just feel you're just portraying me as your diverse token and not necessarily for what I have to say. So I just don't want to be there, because I feel I can be there if I can add and I can really have a real conversation with people. But just sometimes it's framed weirdly, or you understand when you see, who else is talking on this panel, you understand that you're there just for the diversity piece, or can you just sometimes it's can you moderate this panel? And it's I don't want to be like that, because I know that the rest of the panel will sing the same way. And it's true, maybe women wants to, for us, we have to prove maybe more than anyone else that we are capable, and we have all the skills and the knowledge and everything. And so you don't want to be in that situation. So I would tend to refuse those type of panel, to say, no, I don't want to participate, or I just think that my colleague is more, this colleague actually can do a better job, because this is just his peer and things. And so I would refer them to somebody.
Yeah, I understand that would be quite off-putting. I can see Bill Jelen has said that, yes, that's right. If someone asks him to speak, he says yes, and then asks questions later. So I will be asking you, Bill Jelen, if you'd like to speak, definitely, for sure.
I've been trying to be more that way. I've been trying to say more yeses here. I remember what I wanted to say, which is when we were talking about this beforehand, I think this is my experience, but I think, Stephanie, that you kind of agreed that as a woman in financial modeling, when you have an interaction with somebody who doesn't know you, there's just a little bit more barrier to get over. They don't necessarily believe as much as they would with somebody else that you know what you're talking about. Less of an issue now than it would have been kind of earlier on in my career. Mm-hmm. And I think when you have that experience of every first interaction with someone, you've got something to prove, the default assumption is not necessarily that you know what you're doing, then I can absolutely see why it would be more daunting to walk into a room of 100 people and talk to them, because you've got to convince all of them that you know what they're doing. And they're all going to be
I can imagine that when the ModelOff would have changed people's perspectives to you.
Yeah, I did actually this is interesting actually, I did feel after, and obviously I had gained seniority, so I might be attributing it to something that it's not really down to, but I felt that after winning ModelOff, that kind of went away. And I was talking to some of the other guys who I made a lot of friends who ModelOff, and some of them I'm still in touch with. And I was talking to some of the other guys who won it early on, and I said, yeah, actually one of the really good things about winning ModelOff was it meant that people just took me seriously by default. And they were like, yeah, that was never a problem. We were always taken seriously. So I do think, and I think it's probably, I don't think it's ill meant, and I don't think it's a very big difference in how we treat people. But when it's every interaction, I think it does add up. So I can understand why that would be off-putting for presenting. Yeah. If everybody's looking at you and going, oh, we've got 3 guys. Oh, and there's the woman. Does she know what she's doing? I can see why people want it.
And this is why I think there's sort of in the introduction, we talk about the visible industry leaders, right? Because I think we need to, by lifting, sort of increasing the balance, then people get used to having, female financial modelers around, because it shouldn't be, it just shouldn't be weird. No one should question that, but I see it.
It's not weird. They don't, but it's just
there's nothing rational about it, but that's the way it goes. If people feel that way, then it's true, right? So that's why I think it's really important to just, it's a really tricky situation. I get this, Stephanie. Should I take this spot on the panel and make it diverse, or should I say I'm not doing it? The reality is it needs to go back to usually those situations that you're describing, Stephanie. I've seen them plenty of times. It's because it's not thought about in the design process of it. You shouldn't just think about when you're designing a panel discussion, this has got to be a start, or it goes back to the conference. Like, what are the values we're sending as a conference organizer, right? For example, and then this shouldn't be an afterthought. And then you shouldn't be presenting going, we've just picked the 3 white males. Do you want to be in it? Like, it shouldn't come to that conversation. Someone's failed a long time ago, and maybe we need to go back to the drawing board in that situation.
I've just agreed to speak at a conference in Dubai, and there are 3 women and 3 men called Muhammad. So there are as many women speaking as there are Muhammads. So should I say something, or should I just, be one of those women? I don't know whether you have a responsibility as a speaker to make sure that there is diversity on the panel. I think it's something perhaps we need to consider.
I think we all have a responsibility for it, and I am grateful to the men that I know who will call this sort of thing out when they hear it, because for a number of years I was kind of like, the spokesperson or whatever for women in financial modeling, and it is a problem, but it is not just my problem, and I've got a lot of things going on in my life, and I'm not going to spend my entire life trying to solve this particular problem, because I have other things to do as well. And I'm sure, Stephanie, you get this as well. It is not the responsibility solely of people who are diverse to fix a diversity problem. It is everybody's problem. If everybody does a little bit, then we won't have such headaches.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Couldn't agree more, Hilary. We might take a couple of questions before we continue. I can see we have a great comment from Hadia Kianiford, who's one of the most fabulous female financial modelers. She has a really interesting point. She says that we promote financial modeling profession to women, that it's not just a stepping stone. People do often see financial modeling as a stepping stone rather than a career in its own right. And I think that's important to realise. What else? Have we got any other questions that we should approach? No, I don't think we do. I might move on to our next question was, I know, Hilary, you have a young family, as many of us do. Do you think that has, for women generally in financial modelling, do you think that has an impact, or what sort of impact do you find, and how does your company or your work help with that?
Well, I am somebody who has unusually been affected very positively by the pandemic. So I have two children. One of them turned 6 last weekend. The other one turns 3 next weekend. Busy time. And when my oldest child was born, I was working at Operis, was very happy at Operis, but I was living in Reading and Operis was in London. And if I had continued working at Operis, I would not have seen my baby 3 days a week. And he was the world's most clingy baby. And I was like, I can't do this. So I left Operis and I took a job at a company closer to home, which is based in Reading, where I could work mornings and spend time with him. And it worked really well. And I was very happy there for a number of years. And then I kind of realized that the kids were a bit older. I had a bit more independence. And the pandemic had changed things. So I've gone back to Operis. But I'm not doing a standard working pattern. I still work 20 hours a week. I go into the office 1 day a week and I do 2 shorter days and I do the pickup. And this works really well for everyone involved because I have a lot of expertise and experience. I'm able to help with training some of the newer analysts. I really believe that in the time that I'm there, I add a lot of value to Operis. And by enabling that kind of arrangement, it means that you don't lose people out of the workforce for what is essentially 5 to 10 years where people have very small children and maybe their focus is elsewhere, not for all women and maybe for some men as well. And I think historically there's tended to be, you make the choice when your kid's born, are you all into the workforce, are you all into the family, pick one, that's it, you're done, that's your choice. There's no kind of like, I'll do a bit of both and then, and I think that's a real reason that we might lose a lot of really good women out of the workforce because the companies don't do just a little bit of work to kind of...
That's why I started my business, because I had young children and I just simply wasn't prepared I just felt that I wasn't doing either job properly. And so I started to be able, my own business, to be able to do it on my own terms, and I've never looked back.
Yeah. I really do think that Operis aren't doing me a favour by giving me a job. I really do think I'm adding value. Like, this isn't a charity thing of keeping people in the workforce. And I think hybrid working, people are getting more used to people working from home or doing some in the evening, if like logging back online rather than having to physically stay in the office until the deal has closed. I think all of those things will be really good for the representation of anybody who has any kind of caring responsibility, which we all do. It's just that some of us delegate it to other people.
Yeah.
Yes, on this one as well, like on the caring, like traditionally, when you look at like arranging care and in the society, let's not be like overnice. Usually it's women doing that, being like a sick parent or elderly, like women will have the responsibility of doing that. And so when I look, for example, at my company and like in terms of like the type of benefits that they offer, is to have benefits that actually allows you to have like proper care. And also like if you want, like I think it's also like having an enabling policy where people actually have proper care, but also something that people don't think necessarily about, like having emergency care as well. And so those are things that companies should have. But like also coming back on like one of the points that Hilary was mentioning about like her choice and you as well, Danielle, what you wanted to do at that time, I think where sometimes manager can do a better work is like having very open dialogue with employee, and don't assume that when somebody is like returning, for example, from maternity leave, that this person will want to be more with their baby or will want to be like directly back into like full speed transaction and everything, but just have this conversation and allowing people to have this conversation and allowing to have like an open dialogue. Things can change, and that way you don't make assumption, because very often I have friends that like come to me and say, my manager told me, oh, I cannot do, like there is this opening in my team, and then the manager was like, oh, well, but you have young kids, like maybe it's not like this new opening is not for you. No, maybe the person wants to do it, and so you should like allow somebody to actually voice and not necessarily make assumption, because that's a way that then if this is close to you, you will be like, okay, maybe I should go and look for a job elsewhere, and there is a company that will allow me to do that. So one of the things that we talked before, we talked a lot about like how to recruit more women, but I think looking at like analyst class that are usually very diverse, and then when you start seeing up the rank as well, there is less diversity. It's also about like having this kind of open dialogue and like allowing people to actually not assuming that because you are a woman, you will want to do so and so, for example, but allowing effectively people to voice and to say what they want and tell their manager what they want and what they would like to do there is very good for like retention in my sense.
Yeah. And what do you observe at Mazars, Rickard?
Look, I thought I think a lot about the impact of countries and tradition and tax. If I compare, about a year ago, I came back after spending 2.5 years in Sweden. So, I mean, I'm now in Sydney. So it's not the extreme end of the spectrum. Sweden is certainly one extreme end of the spectrum. Australia is probably somewhere halfway, right? But the differences are significant. Both countries have improved a lot. I would say Australia has relatively improved more in the last 20 years than Sweden has. But things like what you were describing, Stephanie, like, you know, who's going to take the kids when they're sick? Mm-hmm. It's a completely different conversation in those two countries. And, you know, who's looking after the kids, even, you know, you split your parental leave and that sort of thing. It's very, very different. And I think it's not something that just employees can't suddenly change one thing, or a team can't do it, or one good team member or team manager can't change everything, but you can do your bit. I mean, a big part of it is, for example, I mean, I got a real issue with Australia's childcare situation, for example. It costs a bomb. One parent is going to stay at home because it's just not worth it. So based on tradition and cultural norms, in 99% of the cases, it's the woman. I've stayed home at times, and when you're surrounded then by 99% mothers, it's just not that much fun. You know, so you go, not that keen. So it's, you know, that there's both things need to change, and sort of need to get a bit more balance into both of those things. I mean, in terms of what we do at Mazars, I mean, there's things like maternity leave arrangements, for examples, but something we had to change. I mean, I probably wasn't the industry leader in terms of inclusion and diversity work back in the Crowley days. I've learned a lot along the path, and some of the things we had to do when we were sort of growing up to be a larger global firm was, for example, networking is not an after-work thing. That was a very simple change. We started doing breakfast briefings, for example, because we only had men coming to our industry briefings. We started doing breakfast briefings on feedback from women, basically saying, I just can't do the afternoon. So we started doing breakfast. It was remarkable, the change. It was really, really good. So then we said, and then, I mean, then we got a lot less men, and they were whinging, right? So we said, well, it's just, we got to accept that we need to mix it up. So it's sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon. But, you know, the traditional model of, you know, you come a bit late to work, you go to the gym, you know, at lunch, and then you go out drinking with the boys after work, you know. That model's dead. No one can do that and get away with it. But that was the path in the transaction world. And, you know, if you didn't hang around to celebrate the big deal with champagne and shots, then you weren't going to go anywhere. But luckily, it's rare to see those events these days. So that's good.
Well, we have the same problem now.
So the other thing I think companies can do, as well as kind of looking at when people can attend things, is actively encouraging the men in the workforce that there are policies in place that they can take time off with the children if they're ill, that they can take paternity leave, because and this is something I feel is often ignored in the discussion of women in the workforce generally, is the fact that actually there's a huge amount of work that women have been doing historically that has to happen and is really valuable. And if we're saying women shouldn't have to do it, well, somebody still has to. And actually, I think men miss out on an awful lot by missing out on the lives of their children when they're young, because you get one shot at that. And so we really need to be in, and obviously you don't fix it unless you've got a couple in the office. You don't fix it for the woman in your office by enabling the men in your office to look after their children as well. But on a society level, that's exactly what has to happen. We need to end up with a situation, well, individuals should make choices, but by the time my boys are growing, I'd like to see it much closer to 50-50, that they get to spend some time with their children, they get a career that's intellectually challenging and rewarding, and that it's not either or, and they have a free choice based on their personalities rather than their genders.
Yeah, I feel really strongly about that men just, companies make it a policy, or governments make it a policy like Sweden, where it is necessary for men to take as much time off as women do, and it's equal, and it should be. We have a great question from Mark. Are the pay scales equal for males versus females for the same financial modelling skills? Well, technically, yes, but in reality, I think we do find there's a bit of a gender gap. Would anybody like to take that question?
I don't know that I can comment much here. I don't, and because all I would say is if you've got any men in the audience and you've got female colleagues, have that conversation with them. That would be really helpful.
Well, I think
Opera says
they are
pay scales
paid the same. I don't know the data, but they're paid the same, but they just basically not moving up the ranks as quickly, and so there is certainly a gap. Have you done anything?
That's something where we have I think it's a good and a healthy focus on this. So we have, it used to be once a year, now I think it's twice a year even, we basically get like gender salary benchmarks and everything per level, per grade, who's been promoted and that. And you can't hide, it's built into your partner metrics. It's not just your metrics, it also has the firm. You get basically called to shame if your country or your department is not behaving. So just proving, for example, there's a continuous discussion around, you've got your pyramid, right, of your various levels, and the conversation is around, if your pyramid looks like this, it's going to look like this in 3 years. So that's not good enough. What are you going to do? And then work around that. So it's it's a pretty big priority. And look, it's interesting what you're saying, Hilary. In I contrast a lot financial modeling, so model build versus model audit. In our team, we have very, very, it's almost perfectly balanced in model audit at every level. Whereas model build, very different story. And the same goes with applications, promotions, senior leaders, completely different. And I can't really work out why that is. Why would we see a different, some people say, oh, there's less stress in model audit or whatever. Well, it's quite stressful when it's not done well. When it's done well, it's not stressful at all, right? And it shouldn't be. But same with financial modeling. I don't understand why there is a difference here. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I know I personally prefer audits, which I think sometimes surprises people, but I don't know why there would be a general case that that's true. I just love working on lots and lots of different deals and kind of seeing a huge variety of it. But that's probably not the same reason that everybody else has.
Now, I know that we are running out of time, so we need to wrap this up shortly. We've got some great comments. Giles has reminded me of the financial modelling survey that came out last year, and that they did do some salary. Yeah, so it does show that there is significantly lower salaries for women and women dropping out of the industry. So thanks for that, Giles. Just to wrap up, the last question I wanted to ask you was, what change would you like to see in the future? How can we go forward, and what changes would you like to see in the industry? Anybody like to start us off?
Well, apart from what I've already said in terms of like childcare things, I think we have a big pipeline issue, and we have a big pipeline issue because of the way we treat young boys and young girls from quite a very young age. We give our girls dolls, we give our boys Lego. I mean, my boys love dolls, they love Lego, they love trains, all the things that people say toddlers love, they love, whether they're girl things or boy things. And I think there's a huge socialization, and until we fix the issues in terms of how we treat boys and girls, we are always going to have a pipeline issue in any kind of technical industry. So I would actually really love if we could see companies doing more kind of outreach with schools, because actually by the time somebody's sort of 21, they've kind of already fixed on a path. So I know, for instance, I'm aware from a friend of a charity here in the UK called STEMETS that kind of partners companies with kind of promising women in STEM, and kind of does that. And there must be equivalent things elsewhere, or even other things in the UK. So I think if you're looking at it going, we can't fix our gender diversity issue because there are no women, then go and do something about that problem.
Any other comments from anyone else about what you would like to see in the future to change this?
Yes, I think in general, like, it's not, I know this panel is about gender diversity, but just like diversity in general, like, I think the industry need to change like their perception to the public. I mean, when you think about financial services, you look at like movies, and it's going to be like movies on Wall Street, and it's very like aggressive type of like cutthroat environment. And I think the industry in general needs to do something better at like portraying what is financial services and what is not financial services. And so that way we can show that like the job is not day to day, like always aggressive, always cutthroat. It's more like collaborative and things that appeal to more people. And so really to grow this pipeline, as Hilary was mentioning, I would really want to see the industry doing better marketing at portraying how things have changed inside the industry.
Yeah. And what about from you, Rickard?
I mean, it's more of an output that I like to see than an input, and it's sort of on the theme of visible leaders. But if I scroll through my LinkedIn feed, I reckon I have probably about, I don't know, maybe 60% male connections and 40% female, but my feed is 98% male. I mean, you put some glimmer of hope in there, Danielle, every now and then, but most of it, and Hedy, I should call her out as well, she does a fabulous job. But generally speaking, there's men, and not all of them are all that great. Sorry.
So yeah, I guess for women to be more vocal, to be out there, and for men to do what they can to, I guess, try to encourage women to be more visible and more out there, I guess, is what. And that's what I have tried to do with the Women in Financial Modelling online meetup group. So I know we had a question about lack of community in areas, and it is online, and we only get together every couple of weeks. So finding communities of practice for women in financial modelling, we do try to do that online. Is one way to do it. If there's any other ways that we can do that, I would love to hear from you, or find ideas to improve the community for women in financial modelling. So I think that's pretty much it. Was there anything anybody else would like to add before we wrap up? I think we're all good to go.
Thank you, Danielle.
Fantastic discussion. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I think we're going to have Giles back to wrap up. Here he is.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you. Amazing discussion. Thank you for everybody that's commented as well. And just to echo, if anybody in the industry is looking to join a group, then please look at Danielle's Women in Financial Modelling online community. It's amazing. So thank you, everybody. Thanks to all the participants on stage, and we will see you back for the next session on the hour.